for the Independent Police Commission. It is formed by mostly pro-establishment camp supporters. How can we trust them? How nobody can hold it accountable?
You can't trust the overseas experts from Britain, Canada,
They are only
Australia,
advisory
New Zealand.
committees. They're not the one who make decisions to handle the complaints.
You also want all charges dropped against protesters who've been arrested, and they've turned that down. But how could they do anything else? If you're found to have broken the law, you should be punished the same way as the police are, shouldn't you?
So why
are you above the law?
So why aren't they punishing the police?
They have in the past. Police have been hauled into court and punished.
We cannot even identify the police because they are not showing their warrants, because they are not showing the numbers. When we cannot hold the police accountable, when nobody can actually punish the police, how come the Hong Kong government it could be charging out protesters with rioting, even though they're only participating in some peaceful marches? That is not reasonable. So
but you don't consider yourselves equal before the law with everybody else, do you?
We are equal before the law.
So why should you get an amnesty? Why? If you've broken the law, and the Hong Kong Bar Association, the Hong Kong Law Society seem to indicate that you have broken the law, shouldn't you be punished for breaking that law?
Well, I believe asking for an amnesty would be the best solution, would be the best resolution to resolve the current situation.
I thought you wanted to uphold the rule of law in Hong Kong.
Yes, we want. Yes, we want.
But at the same time, then you want an amnesty. You want to escape punishment for breaking the law. What kind of lawless society, then, do you want to live in?
I would not say that it's trying to escape from being punished when we have broken the law. I believe the reason why protesters are taking on to the streets is because we want the government to be accountable to us. We want the government to give concrete actions in response to our demands. And I believe that's why we are participating in peaceful marches, lawful marches, ever since June. However, the government, the police had been accusing us, has been arresting us for rioting. And when the reason why they're arresting us is not reasonable at all, how can they charge us? So that's why we're asking...
Well, we'll come on to some of your other actions in a minute, but when it comes to the future, the worry seems to be that you don't have much of a plan, do you, except to keep fighting. You said recently, I have no idea how these protests will end or even what will happen tomorrow. We feel like there is no way back, so we must keep fighting. As if you're a passenger in this movement, but you're not a passenger in this movement. You're one of the spokespeople for this movement, aren't you? Isn't it time you took responsibility for that?
Well, I think definitely I should be taking some of the responsibilities of finding the way out for Hong Kong, for the whole movement. But the fact is, when the situation in Hong Kong is like changing in a very lightning speed every day, we do not see our future. We do not even know what will be happening the next day. Because back in June, back in July, we do not expect the government to be exercising its emergency power.
But you don't have a plan of where to go, do you? Apart from saying we want all our demands met in full, that's the only plan you have, haven't you? That's it.
We do have a plan. We do have a plan. We are very clear that we have to rethink about we have to rethink about the future of Hong Kong. We have to think about the 2047 deadline. And I believe that is a consensus among Hong Kongers. Other than the 5 demands, we are trying to discuss, we are trying to have discussions among different stakeholders in Hong Kong about our future after 2047.
But at stake is not just your fate and your fellow protesters, but millions of other people who live in Hong Kong who are going to have to live with the fallout from your movement and from your movement's actions for many years. I mean, you may be happy to bring China's wrath down on your head, but to collapse the roof on everybody else's head in Hong Kong, is that really a responsibility you want or you're prepared to take?
Well, first of all, I think the majority of Hong Kongers are still in support of the movement. And I believe most of us are quite clear that, and are getting prepared that once we're failing the movement or once, like, the Chinese Communist government would be using violent tactics to end the protests, we are very clear that what the aftermath would be. And I believe the majority of Hong Kongers would like to take the risk in exchange of a better future of Hong Kong.
But don't you have a responsibility to try and find a way back which preserves and strengthens what you already have, instead of risking a crackdown in which you could lose everything?
I believe we do all, for the activists and pro-democracy politicians, we do have the responsibility. But after all, I think the greatest responsibility is the Hong Kong government itself. It is
the British government calls for a meaningful dialogue between all parties with a credible political track to protect the rights and freedoms set out in Hong Kong's basic law. Are you capable of opening that meaningful dialogue? From what you've told me so far, you're not, are you?
Well, I believe the first criteria of having a sincere and meaningful dialogue would be the Hong Kong government itself trying to be sincere. Well, last time when they were inviting student unions to the dialogue, they're trying to have it privately. They're not willing to make it public and to invite other stakeholders. And even when they're trying to invite...
It could have been a start. I come back to that point. It could have been a start.
How could it be a start when they're not being sincere? We do not believe there would be any kinds of meaningful consensus made in the dialogue. When they're trying to arrest our fellow protesters, when they're trying to put us in jail, how can we believe that there would be a meaningful or sincere dialogue? At least they have to stop the prosecutions first. Not forever, but they at least have to show some sincerity.
Some sincerity. People are worried that you're becoming increasingly rigid and inflexible. Joseph Cheng, who led a coalition of pro-democracy groups in 2014, says, "No one ever dares to say, think about it or accept it. Anyone who does so will be severely attacked. We come to a consensus, we stick to that position, and we cannot shift." Is that the way you're going to be able to start negotiations? This rigid inflexibility? You're in danger of becoming just as inflexible as Beijing, aren't you?
I believe the discussion about the future of Hong Kong or how the movement would go is like mushrooming, especially in the recent days when we see that there has been an escalation of violence while we're not achieving anything. We're not forcing the government to respond. I believe there had been more and more discussions, and I believe that peaceful means would be the only way out for us to resolve the current situation in Hong Kong.
Peaceful means, but a group of your protesters have been beating up people who just think differently. September the 15th, we had a group who beat up a 49-year-old Hong Kong man, beat him unconscious because he dared to challenge what the group was doing. Chow Hu-tung remonstrated with your fellow activists. He shouted at them, "Love China, I am Chinese." But they beat him up, unconscious, had to go to hospital. He was in critical condition when he arrived, but he survived. Is that the way you deal with people who think differently from you?
Well, of course, that would not be the very ideal way.
Ideal? You don't even condemn it?
We do not condemn any kinds of...
You have no principles then? If you're not going to
we do have principles.
Inhuman treatment like this, you can't even look me in the face and say, I condemn this kind of inhuman treatment?
We will not do any kinds of public condemns. But still, we are trying to switch the tactics to a more peaceful way.
What about the violence against businesses that are seen as unsupported? How do you imagine you're protecting democracy by trashing ATM machines and Starbucks cafes? How does that help you preserve democracy?
Well, I believe protesters are vandalizing underground stations, vandalizing those Chinese-owned companies for a reason, because they would like to bring actual harm to those companies because they don't support you. It is not about they don't support us. It is about they are the ones who
are... think for themselves. They have to have their windows smashed and they have to have their ATM machines trashed because they just don't think the same way as you do. And you want to preserve democracy.
Well, I believe that would definitely not be the best way. However, they're doing that for a reason, and they're not, they're trying to be rational. And that's why we're not trying to condemn them publicly, but still, we do have reflections, we do have discussions about those vandalizations, and there have been more and more voices about that we should actually try to explore some peaceful ways. So
you're taking part in the local council elections, not you personally, but apparently 450 candidates from the pro-democracy group. Are you willing to switch your attention from demonstrations and violence to politics, to the slow, painstaking often tedious business of politics in order to make Hong Kong work better for its inhabitants? Are you willing to do politics instead of just demonstrations?
Well, I believe the two things have to go parallel, because one side about politics, when we've got pro-democracy activists trying to get into the institutions, we are trying to change the government structure by a democratic way, by elections. And at the same time, we have to continue our protests so that we can put pressure on the Hong Kong government itself. And I believe the two things are not contradictory, and that's why we have to make it go parallel. And I don't believe that we have to put all of our attention, all of our focus on district council elections and try to stop any kinds of protesting. But still, I believe that protests have to be in a peaceful way.
Joyce Yu, it's been good to have you on Conflict Zone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.